If the question is asking about monopolies, they might say if monopolies are always bad or can they be good? So
Yeah.
the first thing I would do in my introduction is just say what a monopoly is. If it's a pure monopoly, it's a sole seller. And if it's a firm with monopoly power, then it has significant market share. Um, and these points can also be applied to oligopolies who collude, and then you would say that they act like a monopoly. The first thing I would do in my first paragraph is draw the diagram, because all my explanations are going to be linking back to the diagram, not even to get more marks, although it would, but more so just because it would help me make everything easier and I wouldn't have to think too much.
Okay.
So let's do that together. The first, also remember the process to do the diagram, it helps. So I always start with a U-shaped curve for average cost, and then my marginal cost goes straight through the middle of this. Okay, let me just do that properly. That will be my marginal cost. I want to do AR. Don't let them go through this section because it just, you don't, it's not a big deal, but it just gets in the way. Let's keep it either side of that. So one going this way and one going this way. It's meant to be like twice as steep. So MR is twice as steep as AR. But just leave this space free. It gets messy. Now, MC equals MR. That's the first thing I would do. I would explain the characteristics of a monopoly to build up to my point about it being good or bad. And this build up is what I would also do in my 15 marker. So I would start by listing out the characteristics, sole seller, monopoly power, high barriers to entry, the aim to profit maximize, explain that profit max is MC equals MR. If it's a 15 marker, go into more detail about why it's MC equals MR. And it's just because you see how MR and MC, if you're at this quantity, then there's a marginal profit. So you'll keep on adding more quantity until there's no more marginal profit to be made by increasing quantity.
Yeah.
If that doesn't make sense, don't worry.
What happens if you go past that point? So then you would make a loss.
You wouldn't actually make a loss overall. If you were to increase your quantity here, you'd make a marginal loss. So let's say you go from 100 to 101. Overall, you're making a profit, but you're making less profit than you would at 100. You're making a loss under 101st item.
Okay, so that point is the best point to be at because before then you're not making most of it, and then afterwards you're going
Exactly.
you're
If I
making a
peak
loss.
one or two or three, I'm making a profit. But the more I increase from 100, I'm making more and more and more and more profit. And after 100, I'm making less and less and less profit.
Yeah.
But I'm still making profit. And this is more of a multiple choice thing. It's not that important for an essay, but it can still help.
Okay.
Um, we can also mention the fact that there is imperfect information and they are selling a unique product or something with product differentiation. Explain that profit maximization occurs at the point where MC equals MR, and therefore monopolies choose to operate at the point. The key word being choose to operate at the point where quantity is Q1 and then price is found at P1. This means that they're making a profit because cost is only C1. And explain that the rectangle shows the supernormal profit and that we have a quantity and call it a low quantity of Q1 and call it a high price of P1. If it's a comparison question, you could compare it to the other market structure that you need to talk about.
Yeah.
In terms of it being good and bad, you could now separate it into two different paragraphs, or you could do, depends on the question, you could just do your paragraph about monopolies and then a paragraph about another market structure and then do a judgment. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Again, I go back to it being well focused and well organized to get 25 out of 25.
Okay.
In terms of the good things, mention that the fact that there are supernormal profits in the long run, you have to say in the long run if you're being accurate, but this is a long run diagram, and there is no short run diagram for a monopoly because there's high barriers to entry. No one else can do anything. So monopolies don't switch from short run to long run. This is the short run and the long run diagram all in one. They are just in the long run all the time. This supernormal profit in the long run allows firms to be dynamically efficient. This is because, and then just give a nice, beautiful chain of reasoning and explain that profit can be reinvested and the reinvestment can lead to improvements and innovations in the product. And then this is what dynamic efficiency is. And I know that some people I used to define dynamic efficiency as an improvement in productive efficiency over time. But just in general, it's just about the improvement and innovation of products. And then if the question's asking about consumers, which it usually might, just mention that this is beneficial for consumers in the long run.
Yeah.
And the important thing is that is application. If the question is asking about like iPhones, then or smartphones or something, you could explain that consumers have a choice to buy a cheaper alternative or not buy a smartphone. You could make that argument and say that consumers are still choosing to buy it, which shows that they are enjoying the product. And mention an example like how if Apple didn't make a profit on the iPhone 4, then the iPhone 14 would not be anywhere near as good as it is right now. That all
Yeah.
happened because of the high prices and the high profits and the high levels of reinvestment, therefore causing all of this improvement in the last 10 or 15 years. You could easily evaluate it in two main ways. This is not the downsides yet. We're going to come to the downsides. This is just the evaluation of the good sides. So these are two different things, by the way. When you're evaluating something, you're just stating the limitations of your argument. And then when you're doing the negatives, that's a complete different thing, ideally. But sometimes you can use your negatives as evaluation if you can't think of any.
Yeah.
Limitations of the argument is simply that not every firm is like Apple. And there's no
Yeah.
guarantee that the firm is going to reinvest their profits. So a lot of companies, especially like Apple, every single penny of profit that they make, they pay the salaries and then they reinvest it. They don't take a lot of money out for shareholders. But other firms, if they make profit, the owners will take money out and out and out. Um, and this means that we wouldn't see anywhere near as much improvement.
Yeah.
The thing is, I explained about how consumers have a choice to buy or not to buy. But if a firm has monopoly power in a merit good, and you can bring this argument about Apple as well, or about energy companies, or about train lines and other stuff, then you could argue that it is unfair, and that the high prices mean that people are not having access to a merit good, which can affect their quality of life and increase inequality. But we can go into more detail in the negatives. We're talking about the negatives of a monopoly now. And again, I would reference the diagram. So if you need to, just say figure one or just say the diagram from above because we're going to need it again in the paragraph.
Okay, cool.
One of the downsides, which I've already been talking about, is the lack of allocative efficiency. And the best thing, remember how I described dynamic efficiency as that you need supernormal profit in the long run. That level of specific knowledge helps you to separate your answer. So let's do the same for allocative efficiency. And it's literally just when um it's when MC equals AR. Or it happens when
Yeah.
MC equals AR. The way I understand this much, much better, and I will not forget it ever again, is because I now understand that it's basically when supply equals demand.
Okay. I I'm quite confident, like comfortable with like all of the different objectives and like which each like the point at which it happens. But like, is do we need to know the actual reasoning for why it's at that point?
Um, Basically, if you know the definition MC equals AR, it's good to
Yeah.
be able to explain it, what the importance of it, because then in your judgment, you're going to be weighing up what would you prefer, dynamic or allocative efficiency. Um, so that helps. So the reason for that is just that in a free market, we're at supply equals demand, right? But we
Yeah.
don't we just say when a free market has the outcome when MC equals AR.
Yeah.
In a free market in year one, you learned that we're maxing on consumer surplus and producer surplus, or in other words, total welfare or total surplus.
Yeah.
You could even draw it like this: supply, demand, consumer surplus here, producer surplus here. And just say that a free market outcome at P1 at Q1 and P1, or you can reference it here and draw Q2 and P2. That would be the ideal outcome to maximize allocative efficiency.
So what do you do? So you're saying to draw this consumer surplus, producer surplus diagram.
Again, you don't have to, but remember, there's never too many diagrams you can draw, and there's never too, sometimes you can get away with not drawing a single diagram. But again, the diagrams are there to help you, not to get you marks. They're there to help you write. So rather than writing something so long, I could just say, this diagram shows consumer surplus and producer surplus being maximized in a free market. And now I can state my point, right?
Okay, so
You don't have to, though.
is this so is this showing that there's no allocative efficiency like in the
This is
diagram? Is that
showing that this diagram here is showing that there is allocative efficiency.
okay?
And the diagram above is a monopoly one where there's not allocative efficiency. And
So
then we can
so
compare.
so what's the like point? Is the point like
A point is that
be like
monopoly
you want it
power
to
is
be like that?
bad because it takes us away from the outcome of a free market. It takes us away from this outcome because our quantity is too low and our price is too high relative to this outcome. This is, in some people's eyes, the ideal outcome because mathematically, it maximizes consumer and producer surplus. So somebody can argue, you don't have to say it's your argument, you can say it's your argument. You could say some people may argue that a free market outcome, which is delivered by perfect competition, is the best
Yeah.
outcome for everybody because we're at Q1 and P1 in this diagram, which maximizes surplus. On the other hand, we have a monopoly outcome here where quantity is too low at Q1 and price is too high at P1. So this means there is a deadweight loss. There's a loss of consumer surplus or producer surplus relative to a free market outcome.
So in that monopoly diagram, can you like talk about the deadweight welfare loss with that little triangle?
Yeah, you can do.
Um,
I don't even know where it is actually. Where is it? Do you know where it is off by heart, or should I check it?
yeah. I
Where is
mean,
it?
is that one? So where P1 meets Q1, is that
Yeah,
point,
yeah,
and then P2 Q2 that point,
yeah.
and then like the lowest point which intersects where MC and MI intersect that point as well.
This one.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
Oh, nice. Okay, I didn't know that, so I'll also double check that. But yeah, that's exactly what you should. That's exactly something that would be good to do. Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Yeah,
also apply to real life scenario. So I was already mentioning inequality and merit goods. And now this
yeah.
is where your argument will come in, and you'll just say that this is more really, really important.
This is not what?
No, this is really, really important to consider if the monopoly is selling a merit good. if the monopoly is selling, say, pharmaceuticals, monopolies often sell like medicine.
Yeah.
Um, then it's really important for them to have a high quantity and a low price because it has to be accessible to all.
Yeah.
And then that's the downside that monopolies sell products which are not accessible to all. Even an iPhone, if um let's suppose that 80% of the population is able to have the best iPhone and 20% of the population is not able to have an iPhone, then that's unfair because people who have an iPhone are going to have better education or better productivity or better living standards than the other people. And then it's unfair on the other 20%. You could argue, right? But at the same time, you could argue that it's not essential. And also, another example I thought was about COVID. AstraZeneca and companies like those have significant monopoly power because there's only two or three companies who sell things like vaccines. Um, they actually make a really large amount of profit. So
Yeah.
because of the profit, they're able to constantly invest in research and development. And the research and development doesn't always even pay off. But when it mattered, for example, with COVID, they were able to create vaccines at a very short amount of time. So,
Yeah.
for example, where the dynamic efficiency helped. And also, in that case, the government was able to just fully subsidize every vaccine for everybody. So nobody had to pay for them. But obviously, it's not like AstraZeneca like gave them out for free. The government basically paid for them.
Okay. But should I use that as an example
Yeah,
or
again, it's where appropriate. So um, you could mention it in the dynamic efficiency paragraph, or you could mention it here and just explain that if you could explain that if AstraZeneca had monopoly power and governments didn't subsidize it, then not everyone would have been able to afford a vaccine, which would have been a bad outcome of a monopoly.
okay.
And you could
Yeah.
weigh it up against the idea that, well, they needed all that profit, which allowed them to reinvest and make this happen. Um, then along these lines, I'd also mention productive efficiency as another benefit in the same paragraph, and just mention that one more benefit, no, sorry, one more downside is a lack of productive efficiency. But to be honest, there's not like too much to say for this. Because productive efficiency is just when you're minimizing your average cost. So when you're at this point over here.
Uh, can you not say talk about like if they can reduce the long run average cost, but like if they use economies of, I mean like benefit from economies of scale, but like in some cases like technical economies of scale or like bulk buying and stuff like that, they
Yeah, you
can
can
reduce.
mention that they're way more likely to achieve economies of scale. Good. And I was just going to evaluate this as well and just talk about X inefficiency, which is
Yeah,
the monopolies choose to be productively inefficient on purpose because let's say this quantity Q, let's just pretend it's Q3. They don't even want to be at Q3, so why would they bother? They can make higher profit at Q1, so it doesn't even matter for them.
yeah,
But you could, when you're explaining in terms of the why it's bad, right? You know how we have to explain why it's bad. You just talk
yeah,
about waste. If they're not minimizing costs and they're causing and creating waste of resources, maybe it could be wasting electricity, wasting energy, because it costs them more to go and like get somebody to be really careful about recycling and stuff like this. So instead they just like waste stuff and it's bad for the environment and it's bad for everyone.
okay,
Cool. And then overall, the most important part of any essay is the judgment. Sorry, it's not the most important, but one of the most important is the judgment. And the best thing to do is to refer to your points and say what your favorite points are or what your most important points are in the context of the question.
yeah,
And the very, very high level essays would not only just talk about the good and bad things about monopoly, but it would apply it to, for example, if it's asking about an iPhone or if it's asking about a vaccine company, which could be quite likely given that COVID was a few years ago.
Yeah.
And the fact that the government, just some kind of knowledge, like for example, AstraZeneca is a kind of a monopoly and the government subsidized all vaccines.
So with that AstraZeneca point, is that so? Would I say they're dynamically efficient, and then talk about like how they use that on short notice, and then they were able to produce the vaccine, and then the government subsidized it.
Yeah,
What,
yeah, exactly.
like what else would I say?
Well, I would just give an example and just say that it depends which point you're making. But if you're talking about dynamic efficiency, then you can back it up and say AstraZeneca make really high profits. I'm trying to research quickly. I know they like a few years ago they make revenues of like $30 billion a year.
Yeah,
Those kind of figures. I can't find the profit right now. But one if they're making so much profit, then it gives them way more chance of solving problems and being first to innovate. For example, with COVID vaccines.
yeah. I searched up, said 8.2 billion in 2023.
Crazy. So yeah, that's
Cool.
good. Um, and then if you're talking about the allocative efficiency point, you can back it up and just say that AstraZeneca is not allocatively efficient or a monopoly is not allocatively efficient. This is quite dangerous because, especially if they sell merit goods such as pharmaceuticals, vaccines, drugs, medicine, and if they choose to profit maximize and operate at a low quantity and a high price, then not everybody would be able to have access to the vaccine. Um, that would lead to a inequality and differences in living standards because people who would not be able to afford it would suffer. Luckily, the government was able to step in and subsidize these for everybody. But it also maybe it could be that AstraZeneca was kind enough to lower prices for vaccines, knowing the so it like do you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the real life scenario, but yeah,
So
could
you're
talk about
saying that,
one more thing. You could even talk about price discrimination and say that Apple offers student discount because they know the value of a MacBook to a university student, that kind of thing.
yeah.
Yep.
So for the AstraZeneca part where you said they're not allocatively efficient, so because they're selling a merit good in the form of a vaccine,
Mm.
if that's not allocated, it can lead to inequality in living standards dropping, and that's a market failure. Market failure can arise as well
That's a
because
market failure of itself. It has negative externalities of
yeah,
inequality, has negative externalities. So
okay,
it
cool,
can cause like crime or people just being upset and stuff like this. Even
yeah,
yeah, okay. But yeah, the best part we did, the best thing, just keep your essay plans really simple. Pick your 2 or 3 or 4 main points and just stick to them and don't go too far ahead of yourself. But if you
yeah,
go into further details, then just leave 5 or 6 lines. I think I did this in one of my essays. Leave like 5 or 6 or even half a page. Carry on, and then if you have time at the end, you can keep on adding more stuff. That's a
yeah.
way to do it as well.
So if this question, monopoly is always bad. So your main points would talk about dynamic efficiency, allocative efficiency, and then a third point, like kind of productive efficiency
Yeah.
and like X inefficiency. So talk about efficiencies. Like,
Basically, that just makes it easier, and as well as economies of scale, which is another great point that you made, being a good thing.
yeah, okay.
You can also add other stuff, add anything you like, and especially if it's an extract question, go ahead and use
Yeah,
what they give you, but just use efficiency as your bread and butter because if it's not an extract question, that's the only thing you have to talk about.
yeah,
And then you could add stuff to it, and it just keeps it simple. It means you don't have to think in the middle of the exam or what are all the good things and bad things. You just know that the number one main benefit of a monopoly is dynamic efficiency. It just stops you from overthinking and wasting time.
yeah,
Okay. Shall we move on?
yeah.
Which one do you want to do next? Or no preference?
Oh, is oligopolies the next one? Like
Yeah,
on
that's what I
your
was going to do. Do you want to do that one?
yeah,
Okay. I'm going to apply it to a question that came up about supermarkets, but the question could easily come up about anything like energy companies, So I'm gonna try and give you tips where your question would differ based on the scenario.
Okay.
In my introduction, I would explain that oligopolies are markets with a few firms. And I would explain that the outcome can be good or bad,
Yeah.
but this depends on many factors. Oligopolies is very unique. We can't talk about efficiency that easily.
Yeah.
So a few firms and the outcome can be good and bad, but this depends on factors such as the type of oligopoly, because there are two types.
Okay.
Oligopolies can end up being collusive or they can end up being competitive. And this is also type or the conduct or the behavior. You could use any of these words.
Yeah.
So if the question is about supermarkets or coffee shops, then you would go down the competitive oligopoly route. If the question is about oil companies, then it's definitely a collusive route. It's kind of crazy. Like OPEC is literally, I didn't read about it properly until recently, but um, OPEC is literally firms that have colluded.
Yeah.
OPEC is oil producing countries who have colluded to limit and influence the global oil market.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so this can be in your introduction or as part of one of the two paragraphs, more applicable to the collusive part,
Yeah.
and also useful for 15 markers. It's good to give a reason for collusion to have a good chain of reasoning.
Yeah.
Easiest way to explain why firms collude is because of game theory.
Yeah.
You don't need to know the technical dilemma model or anything as part of the spec, but it's just a really good, easy model to know. And you could just explain that game theory studies the outcomes of events where two or more people like interact, or how game theory studies how one person's behavior affects the outcomes of another person. You could just explain that in your own words, or you could Google the definition after the lesson. Okay.
Yeah.
And then my favorite way to do it is just to say one example is prisoner's dilemma. And if you want to, if you feel confident, you can draw it, or you could just explain it in words. If
Okay.
I was to explain it in words, um, sorry. If I was to explain it in words, I would just say that it was a study, it was a game where two people were guilty of a crime and they had the option to confess or deny.
Yeah.
They were not allowed to talk to each other, and they both ended up confessing, which led to an outcome, say, of 5 years.
Yeah.
If they were able to talk to each other, they would have both denied, and they would have been able to receive to either be let out free or to be let out within 1 year, which was a better
Yeah.
outcome. So this model shows that talking or communicating or colluding always leads to better outcomes or leads to the possibility of better outcomes. And that's
Okay.
the explanation of why firms may collude, because they know that even in games, cheating or communicating leads to better outcomes.
Yeah.
And in a common marketplace, this is meant to be illegal, or at least in with EU competition law and with the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK as well.
Yeah.
If you wanted to draw it again, you could Google the numbers and just do like person A,
Yeah.
person B, confess, deny, and just put the numbers. But I feel like that would be quite difficult under pressure unless you memorized it.
Yeah.
Um, Now that we've explained why they collude, we want to talk about, so this is the behavior and then the performance or outcome.
Yeah.
One easy way to do the outcome section, now that we've done the hard part, is just say that firms who collude agree to set prices high and output low and take advantage of their market share. This leads to an outcome of the same as what would happen if the firms, say 2 or 3 firms collude, they act as one big monopoly.
They what?
If I have 2 or 3 firms,
Yeah, who collude, they act as a monopoly.
they act as one big monopoly.
Oh, did you say firms who collude set prices high and what low?
Output low,
Okay, yeah.
but that's what I was going to get onto anyway. When you're doing the monopoly, you don't have to revise this again because it's literally what we did in monopoly, high prices and low output. And but make sure you say act like a monopoly. Don't say they are a monopoly, they act like a monopoly. That's very important. I mean, it should be common sense, but just be careful with stuff like that. Um, and then you could draw the monopoly diagram again. Some people do like a monopoly diagram with a kink demand curve and stuff. I would not bother doing that. It's confusing. Just do a monopoly diagram, okay? But
Yeah.
make sure you keep using the word and the explanation that they're acting like a monopoly.
Okay, because if you were to say they are, then wouldn't that be like fraud analysis and they wouldn't give you marks?
Exactly. And you can
Okay.
also mention either in your evaluation or your chain of reasoning that the agreements can be secret or formal. I think the words are tacit or overt, but again, you don't have to know every word as if it was from the textbook. As long as you're explaining things well, you're fine. But I'd
Okay.
still be aware of them.
Yeah.
Um, for example, OPEC formerly collude, but in the UK, in a random like say supermarkets, um, they can't secretly collude. I mean, they can't formally collude, so they might secretly collude.
Okay.
Or they might try a merger, which is legal, but can also get denied by the authority. So in the supermarkets question in that year, 2019 or something, in the extract, it mentions that Tesco is number one, Asda
Yeah.
and Sainsbury's are number two. And it actually mentions in the extract that Asda and Sainsbury's attempted a merger, so a legal merger where they tried to turn into one firm.
Yeah.
This was actually denied. So this is what good application means. I haven't really talked about what application entails in an essay, but the fact that I have a point and I recognize that it was actually part of the extract and I highlighted it and I talked about it, that means that I'm doing good application and I'm applying my knowledge to the question. Because um technically the supermarkets thing is a competitive oligopoly. So it wouldn't really be appropriate to talk about collusion. But the fact that the extract said that there was a potential merger, you would say that a risk that if the two, um, again, the fact that it was denied changes the story. But if you were to say that something like, if the merger went through, or if firms were to merge in the future, then it
Yeah.
would significant monopoly power for the 2 firms which, say, Asda and Tesco buy each other or merge with each other, then that would lead to significant monopoly power. And then that firm would be able to act like a monopoly.
Yeah.
So context is very important. If it's about OPEC or something, then you could just jump straight to it and just say these firms collude, they set prices high and output low, and they act like a monopoly. But if it's about something random, it's more likely, it's very less likely that they would collude. So you have to explain the reasoning why you're saying this, or stick to competitive oligopoly arguments. In terms of the good and bad about this, you could just say potential dynamic efficiency, but that could easily be evaluated and say that it's not very likely. Yes, they're making supernormal profits in the long run, but the fact that they're already cheating by colluding, um, then it means that they're not going to be thinking in consumers' interests and they're just taking advantage of their market share, market power.
So what was is that cheating point linked to the dynamic efficiency?
Yeah, I'm just saying that it might not be likely because like if firms like OPEC, let's say OPEC, they're colluding on purpose to make, they're literally openly colluding in order to maximize their profit. So uh it's unlikely that they're going to be using their profit. They're clearly doing profit for selfish reasons rather than making profit in order to benefit consumers, and then they're probably not going to reinvest too much.
Okay, so
Yep.
that is not likely to be dynamic efficiency because dynamically efficient because they're acting in self-interest and rather than consumer like welfare and like
Yeah.
product in the
And
product there.
dynamic efficiency boils down to two things. One is supernormal profit in the long run, and two is reinvestment.
Yeah,
So you say that yes, this is a tick, but this is gonna maybe be a no.
yeah. Okay,
Restart the meeting.
okay.
On the other hand, like the supermarkets question, if you read the extract carefully, it mentioned that Tesco and As no Sainsbury's and Asda wanted to merge, and they mentioned in their brief that or to the press or to the CMA that one of the reasons is to merge and become a big supermarket, and the aim is to benefit consumers because they'll be able to uh, benefit from economies of scale and reinvest. So um, in that case, you could argue that there is going to be more likely to be dynamic efficiency. So again, it depends on the context. That's really important.
Okay, so that's an eval point.
Yeah, it's like a
Okay.
positive evaluation point, or even just again, it depends on the context how you're describing things.
Yeah.
It's either an evaluation, or you could just say that this dynamic efficiency, like I think there would be dynamic efficiency. Extract C says that Sainsbury's and whatever was trying to make things better for consumers and just link it to dynamic efficiency.
Yeah.
Okay. The downside is lack of allocative efficiency and lack of productive efficiency, and it's the same stuff we already talked about. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah. So kind of recycle the points so for the
Yeah.
same the oligopoly question.
100%, 100%. You
Yeah.
can
Okay.
recycle the monopolies here.
But the only difference being you can mention collusion. That's the main thing.
The only difference is collusion and the reasons why they collude um
Yeah.
and the context.
So what is there any more points or is that the
For a collusive oligopoly, I would just focus on these.
yeah
There are some more points such as like um price leadership, or you can even mention like yeah, you could mention if we're talking about bad sides, you could talk about low contestability or not even low, no contestability.
yeah
There's a lot of other points, but these are, I think, enough for you to write an essay on.
yeah okay
And then link that to barriers to entry, which are very, very high.
yeah
And yeah, I would just stick to these basically. You're more
yeah
than welcome to add more points. There's definitely more stuff you can say, but I don't really see the point of going into so many points in a lot of detail that you won't have time to write about.
yeah
Competitive oligopolies, you can't recycle any of the points. So I would explain that. Again, based on game theory, firms are aware that their behavior affects other firms, affects the outcomes of other firms. Or you could say the behavior of other firms affects their outcome. So every firm knows this. This is because of like game theory studies and behavioral economics. Sorry, not behavioral economics, game theory studies and um, like examples such as prisoner's dilemma, models like that.
yeah
Um, and this means competitive oligopolies know that they are interdependent.
uh did you mean outcomes instead of outcomes did you mean like other forms
Sorry, yeah.
outcome
or competitors or whatever.
Yeah.
This means that the firms are interdependent, which means, again, that's just what I've described, that they depend on
Yeah.
each other, how they behave. This
Yeah.
means we can now, so we're building a nice chain of reasoning again, which is like the most important thing. This means we can model competitive oligopolies by using the kinked demand curve.
Yeah.
This is a really important diagram to learn, and it's really easy. There is there are two versions of this, an easy version and a hard version, but there's no extra benefit of overcomplicating things.
Yeah.
So by adding marginal cost, profit, and all this stuff, it doesn't make too much difference to the way you describe your point. So personally, I would just choose to do price quantity and then literally just this, nothing else. Demand equals AR.
Okay. Would
Um,
they like they not be like would there be less I mean would they award less marks or I mean like not value it as much just because there's less things in it or
Um, this is where I struggle personally with essay writing subjects because you never know what an individual examiner is going to feel about your point. But personally, I believe that if somebody's reading a lot of essays every day, they want to see, and based on the mark scheme, if we're just being objective and looking at the mark scheme always uses words like good knowledge, low errors, um, well organized, good chain of reasoning. So, in my opinion, if your overall essay is very good and you've worded things very well and you've used some fancy stuff like prisoner's dilemma,
yeah.
now if I just use the kink demand curve in a simplistic way and describe it very well, I would rather do that than do a harder one, which might take me a lot of time. But if you do know the other version of this diagram off by heart, then feel free to do it.
Okay.
I
And
genuinely, I don't even know it myself. I believe there's like a marginal cost that's like this and then something. Do you know what I mean? You might
yeah.
know. I genuinely don't know it. If you were
Yeah.
to learn it, then of course put it in. So if
Yeah.
anybody does know it, then they could just put that diagram in. But you're not going to get marked from a level 4 to a level 5, 5 to a 4, or 4 to a 3 just because you picked this diagram.
Yeah.
In the spec of AQA, it literally says students should know the kink demand curve model. It doesn't even tell anybody what exactly the diagram is.
Yeah.
So yeah. And on all the big like Econ plus Dal allows people to go more advanced and you can see the bigger diagram, but all the main textbooks and stuff, I think they just show this.
Okay.
Now it's about describing it. Again, really important for 15 markers and 25 markers. And we've explained that we're modeling the firms with a kink demand curve model because of the interdependence. And we just described that firms are scared or basically choose not to ever raise their prices.
Yeah.
They do not raise prices and they do not lower prices. The reason
Yeah.
for them not raising prices is because if they were to raise prices, they would lose almost all of their customers since other firms are providing relatively similar products.
Yeah.
And firms do not lower their prices because if they were to lower their prices, other firms would undercut or match them, and then every firm would lower their profits. So there would be no point ever doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have to talk about like like go into detail about like, inelastic and like elastic because like if they go down then there's less profit for less revenue for everyone and all of that. Do I have to like
So
talk about how it's
if it's a 15 marker explaining how price is determined in a oligopoly, then this is your chance to just show off knowledge where you
yeah
would then explain that this section of the curve is elastic and this
yeah
section of the curve is inelastic. If it's a 25 marker and it's asking about if an oligopoly is good or bad, you need to stick to your answering the question and the benefits and negatives of it.
okay
So, or if you wanted to leave space and maybe write it if you have time after. But it's not, there's no point going into over detail about random stuff.
yeah
But again, by drawing the diagram, you're showing that it's elastic. Even if you label it, I think you get marked down.
Okay.
Um, explain why they can't raise prices or lower prices, and explain that prices are therefore stable, or you could use the word sticky. But basically, we have stable prices. I prefer that.
Could you say like price rigidity?
Say it again, sorry. Oh yeah, perfect. That's
Price.
the one. I like that. Price rigidity, or just say prices are rigid.
Yeah.
Or- And now we need to explain the good and bad things about this. First of all, I'm not personally sure if this is meant to be a high price or a low price, purely based on the model. But I think that could depend on many, many, many factors. So that could be one evaluation for later. We don't know if the price is necessarily very high or low.
Yeah.
Uh, and it depends on factors such as price leadership, price wars, because this is just in theory, but in real life, it could be, let's say, five firms. One firm has 40% and the other firms have like 15% or something.
Yeah.
It's all going to depend in real life. But the main argument is that firms are not able to gain an advantage by lowering or raising prices. And this leads to a high amount of non-price competition. This is your most important point.
Okay.
If I go to Sainsbury's or Tesco or Asda, my milk will be a similar price, my croissants will be a similar price, my bread will be a similar price. So instead, and they're also stable and predictable. I know as a customer that I'm able to go to different competitors and expect similar prices. That's a really good thing for a consumer. It gives you peace of mind, um, that you can compare prices and they'll be similar. And then that means consumers can choose their favorite thing based on non-price competition,
Yeah.
which means that things like advertising,
Brand
branding,
loyalty. Yeah.
yeah, but more importantly, customer service. So every
Mm.
firm knows that they can't change price and they can't really do much. So they know that every firm is going to be on their best behavior to be offering really good consumer customer service.
Yeah. Okay.
Things like Nectar card, Club card, just things like complaints, handling complaints, refunds, anything,
Yeah.
just real life knowledge.
Yeah. Okay.
And then that leads to a happy outcome for consumers.
Yeah. Consumer welfare is good then.
Yeah. And this is oligopoly is different. We don't know a fancy diagram. We can't really bring in allocative efficiency, productive efficiency based on the numbers, like based on MC equals AR and stuff like that. So, but we can say that this is likely to be a good outcome for consumers.
Okay, cool.
Okay. But we can't say that it's necessary that they're allocatively efficient because there could still be a lower output. We don't know if
Oh, yeah.
there
Okay.
could be high barriers to entry still, even if it's a
Yeah.
competitive oligopoly. The firms who manage to get in is competitive, but
Yeah.
like Audi and Lidl became big recently, but we can't. There's not. It's not like there's random new supermarkets opening up whenever they want. It's quite difficult still.
Yeah.
So
You know,
disadvantage. Sorry, go on.
yeah, just before the non-price competition, what do you say? There was not able to gain or lose. Like I can't remember the what you
They
said. It was
can't
like,
gain advantage by raising or lowering prices.
yeah, okay.
So they're only able to gain or lose market share advantage by non-price competition, by improving services.
Yeah. Okay.
One of the downsides you could mention is barriers to entry.
Yeah.
And one sick evaluation that I only learned like yesterday or the day before when I was writing my own essay was local monopolies. This is
Local.
actually a really, really good point, and it's so interesting as well. Imagine you've got Sainsbury's, Tesco, Asda, all these kind of ones. Imagine you're in the middle of the motorway and there's a Sainsbury's petrol station or like them branded petrol stations on the motorway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then they're gonna have a monopoly in that area, or even forget the motorway example because that's even a bit extreme. In London, we go to so many Sainsbury's, Tesco. Like within 5 minutes, I've got Sainsbury's and Tesco. I've got two.
Yeah,
So this is not going to happen. But if I live in a random part of the UK, which is a little rural, I might only
yeah,
have Sainsbury's in within a 30-minute drive.
yeah,
So they are more likely to charge higher prices compared to another Sainsbury's or another Tesco. And then that would be, this isn't part of the spec again, but it's just a good evaluation that they might have a local monopoly.
yeah. So for the local monopoly point, you're saying that um this for the oligopolies, despite them normally doing non-price competition in the local monopolies case, the prices can be higher because they don't really have any competition. So they can hike up the prices and nobody can do anything about it.
Perfect, exactly. So in you could just mention that the kink demand theory is the kink demand curve shows the model in theory. However, in reality, the model could be limited because it assumes that firms can never, ever, ever compete on price. However, there are some instances in real life where a firm can compete on price. For example, if they have a local monopoly and they are one of the only supermarkets in that particular area.
Can you
Thing
like
about The thing about, wait, sorry, one more thing. The thing about in reality versus in theory is a big one in economics. You could apply
yeah,
that to many, many topics and just say that our textbook teaches us that, like, word it differently. Our textbook teaches us that on paper, like, you know how we said like a tax, we said a tax is going to cause supply to shift to the left. But in
yeah,
the real world, it doesn't account for the fact that it's inelastic demand.
yeah.
That's basically what evaluation, limitations of what we're learning.
You know what the point you just said? Can you say that again? The king demand shows model in theory, however,
I just said that a kink demand curve shows that in theory, oligopolies, competitive oligopolies are good because firms can never compete on price. So therefore, they only compete on non-price.
so in theory, oligopolies
Compete on non-price and cannot compete on price in theory.
non-price.
However,
Yeah,
however, in reality,
yeah.
um, firms can compete on price in various instances, such as, and you could think of other, but I just said if they have a local monopoly.
It can compete on price. For example, in the
In a
case of
local monopoly, yeah.
yeah, in a local monopoly. Uh,
Uh,
would you you know that you're like when you're writing a paragraph, you don't need to space out like your evaluation and analysis and stuff, right? You include it all in the same paragraph.
Wait 1 second. I just thought of one more example quickly. Burger King in an airport.
Yeah,
Burger King on the high street is relatively cheap, and you could use like the Burger King app and get a Burger King app. Oh, that's a sick one. Burger King app is basically an example of non-price competition because you get like cool vouchers and whatever, and this is basically good customer service. But if you
yeah,
go to Burger King on the airport, they're one of the only fast food chains on the airport, and they basically have double the price.
yeah.
Yeah. In terms of your question, there's no right or wrong way to do it, but I go back to how a level 5 answer on the mark scheme always says the word well organized. So personally, I prefer to say if I've written a um say if I've got an intro, I've got a paragraph one, I would rather just leave a new line and just say in evaluation and then do
Okay.
and then start my new paragraph,
Yeah,
the big paragraph, and then just do an evaluation and then do a judgment. If you don't have to do this, it makes no difference. But I just think about like you have to remember the examiner is reading 100 papers in 1 day, and they're probably going to be bored and they're probably going to be tired.
yeah,
Or even if it's just a positive mindset, you just want to impress them.
yeah,
It's slightly better. But sometimes you do evaluations about your argument. You don't have to do evaluations all the way at the end of your paragraph.
yeah.
You're also allowed to compare during your paragraph. So if you are doing that, then
Okay, yeah, cool.
but if you're like if it's a complete separate part of evaluation, just do it separately. Why not? Just
Yeah.
leave it. goes a long way. Even if you do a diagram, just instead of squeezing the diagram, spacing it out and then talking about it, it just helps.
Yeah.
And then in terms of judgment, you could talk um in terms of judgment, I would mention the competition policy and the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK. And I would mention that if it's a competitive oligopolies question, I would say something along the lines of competitive oligopolies usually lead to good outcomes for consumers,
Yeah.
such as a good customer service. However, there is always a possibility of mergers or collusion, which would lead to worse outcomes. So therefore, the government should not intervene, but they should still continue to monitor the behavior of them to ensure that there is no risk of collusion.
So no government intervention.
Personally, again, there's no right or wrong, but I said my judgment would be for the supermarkets question.
Yeah.
Supermarkets are serving customers well,
Yeah.
but the government should still monitor, not do anything, just monitor the supermarket sector to prevent merger or collusion because that could lead to worse outcomes.
Yeah.
There would basically be no benefit of having just one supermarket firm. That would be pointless
Yeah.
because it's yeah. Okay, cool. But again, it depends on the question.
Yeah.
Cool.